Welcome to season 2 of Cult to the Workforce. This is an unusual season. It's taken a little bit more time for us to prep, so it's going to be shorter. We're going to have 4 episodes. And the very first one does not have a guest. I'm just going to be talking with you about some of the things that I've been trained on that might help you think about what would make a good program to participate in if you are looking for leader development, and specifically as a woman. Last year, I attended a training from Dr. Susan Madsen. She lives in Utah. She is an expert in leader development for women specifically. And so, as I listened to it, it was very helpful as a practitioner to think about what I would develop and some of the ways that I've developed my leader development program for women. But it's also, if you aren't participating in my program, a really good thing to think about when you are considering development for yourself. So instead of talking about it from a practitioner standpoint, a leader development practitioner, I'm going to talk with you about how to vet the programs you are considering. With that, we're just going to kind of jump in. I will be looking at notes throughout this. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. Okay, so when we think about leader development, there are a couple of different concepts. One is there's this shift from doing to being. And so when we think about that, there's yet another level of this, which is shifting from being to becoming. And when I think about leader development, even for myself, I think about how I want to truly become. And some of that requires doing. Eventually, you kind of develop this skill set where you think, okay, well, I'm being consistent, but has that actually become who you are? When we think about leader development, there are 3 levels or 3 really essential components that you need to be looking for. And this is based on the research, again, that Dr. Madsen has done of what actually makes the difference for women with that longer term impact. And the reason that's important is because somewhere around, I want to say 70 to 75% of leader development programs end up not showing performance improvement for the participants. And that's not what you want. We really want this to be something, especially if you're investing in it personally or you're asking your company to invest in it, you want to make sure that this is something that's going to make a difference. So the 3 things are, number 1, leadership identity. Number 2 is calling and purpose. And number 3 is unconscious bias. And I just want to take a moment to talk about each of those. And I would say personally, as I sat in the class, and as I thought about the experiences I had realizations of where I had experienced gaps when I was participating in programs. And I saw areas where I needed to improve as a leadership coach. So let's just start with the first one, leadership identity. There are 3 different levels. One is individual internalization. So that means that you actually incorporate the identity of yourself being a leader. Like you literally think to yourself, I am a leader. Number 2 is relational recognition. So that's where the leader starts being identified by others as being a leader. And the third one is this concept called collective endorsement. So in that case, their identity is being kind of validated in a broader context. The other thing that's really interesting that I think was fascinating was this concept of internalization. Like, do I actually think of myself as a leader? It's when I do stakeholder-centered coaching, one of the key beliefs of leaders that they see being successful is their belief in seeing themselves as that. So sometimes it might seem odd or it might seem like a fluffy, quote unquote, type of exercise to sit down and think about, where have I seen leadership in my life? What are my aspirations? Do you have imposter syndrome? Are there all of these things that we think about kind of have to be wrestled through at some capacity? So having a program that allows you the time and the space to do that is really important. Our identity as leaders is impacted by a lot of things, one of which is how do we view leadership? Do we have the aspiration for it? Do we have the ambition? Do we have the confidence for it? Do we focus too much on perfectionism? I talked in the last season about Sally Helgeson's book on women in leadership and how one of the things that holds them back is this perfectionism or ruminating on things. So there's a lot of this internal work that you would want to have in a program. The second topic that I brought up was calling and purpose. And this is a really interesting topic. It's one that I'll share some stories about, things that I've been thinking about even in the last year. But one of the concepts that came up is if you don't feel like there's a calling and a purpose, and you have a reason to step up as a leader, what the research is showing is that women don't step up for it. I had a conversation with a colleague of mine this last year that was really interesting because I'm not someone who naturally seeks after getting the most views or having a lot of people talk about me. I don't really feel the need to have all the credit. And my friend looked at me and he said, Emily, do you think that you could help more people by being better known and having more clients? And I mean, for me, the answer is yes. I do great work. I have a great track record. My clients trust me. And he said to me, Emily, if you want to do that, you have to be better known and you have to step into the spotlight. This is something that's been really interesting for me to think about because as I've coached leaders and women, we've had similar conversations where they'll say to me, I'm really, if someone's approached me about being in a role and I never pictured myself in that. And I don't know if that's something that I really want to do. And I don't think the answer is always say yes. I think there's a lot of things that we would think about. And I'm going to talk about this very neutrally, whether it's men or women looking at CEO roles. When I have coached them, one of the things that they are thinking about is, what is the impact on my family? What is right with my lifestyle? How is this going to impact it? Obviously, stepping into that role is huge. Same questions apply if you are thinking about stepping into a new role in another way. I would just position for you that sometimes we need to think about, do we have a calling in life and would that role allow us to do it? If we don't feel like we have a calling and a purpose and there is something that we could do for others, we don't see, what the research indicates is they don't see women stepping up to the plate in terms of actually grabbing hold of the opportunities or finding the ambition to go after it. I think this is really interesting because one of the things that she talked about were the benefits of feeling like there's a calling of stepping into this role. And I just want to mention some of them because I think it's, again, interesting to think about. One is better job performance, heightened job satisfaction, greater life satisfaction, better psychological well-being, so increased happiness, a heightened sense of identity, enhanced adaptability, lower absenteeism, greater meaning in life, increased social connectedness, satisfaction of fulfilling God's plan, deeper career engagement, increased positive work attitudes, decreased boredom. All of these things are great. So when we look at this, one of the things that they are seeing in the research is that a program that you would want to participate in should have some focus or an opportunity for you to think about, what do you feel like your calling and purpose is, and how would a leadership role enable you to fulfill that? Okay. I want to talk about the third thing, which is unconscious bias. So this was a really interesting conversation. And the big thing that I want to mention here is that when Dr. Mattson was talking about this, she was very specific in saying that if you are going to be trained on unconscious bias in the workplace, it has to be somebody who is an absolute expert like that. Not women, not men, like literally just unconscious bias is their expertise, including the impact of training someone on it and how that impacts them in the workplace. Because as you train on unconscious bias, there's going to be different responses in your organization. This is actually one of the reasons some of the people who I've talked to about this podcast have noticed that we don't talk about unconscious bias on the podcast. And the reason for that is very, very specific. And I want to just mention that briefly. One of the things that I have found to be very interesting as an executive coach is that when I have observed women talking about the very difficult experiences, if it is not handled in the right way, it can really work people up and leave them angry. That's not to say that we're avoiding the topic. What I am going to say is that when I have seen that anger then go with someone back into the workplace, they tend to get burned really bad. And sometimes, in addition, the recommendations that people have of what worked for them in one situation wouldn't actually work for someone else in a different culture or company. And because this is a podcast that focuses on here's some things I've learned, here's some principles I can share, one of the decisions that I made early on to make sure that this was a podcast that was helpful in its recommendations and not harmful is that if someone was going to come on and talk about unconscious bias, they had to be a specific expert in that. And if I ever find someone who is a member of the church and has that deep expertise and can talk about it in a way that helps women wrap their mind around it in a really positive fashion, rather than just leaving them frustrated and angry, I will absolutely bring that person on. So I think that that's just as you think about it, that's going to be something that if you're looking at programs and they say that it's covered, be very careful in finding out who's actually teaching that. One of the things that I've done as I've worked with organizations is I've actually talked with HR because sometimes HR has very specific training that has been brought in and that is specific to the scenarios. And I've chosen to focus more on the first two elements with leader identity development and calling and purpose, while partnering with the organization for any of the leaders I work with to get the additional unconscious bias training. And again, that's just because every company has its unique approach and its unique challenges. Okay. Let's see here. Just a few other things to think about. Some other things that are interesting. When we look at women's leader and development programs, one of the things they find is that one-day programs do not move the needle. And when you think about what we just talked about of your identity and some of the things you might need to work through, or your calling or unconscious bias training, those things take much more than one day. It's very easy to think, well, we'll send someone to a conference, or this will be, we're going to send them to an event. That might create awareness, but it's not going to make the shift that people actually need. And that's actually true of any leader development. That the one-day intro might create awareness. You might even work on developing a skill, but it's the longer-term programs that really make a difference. What Dr. Batson recommended, which I think is so interesting, is a 3-day program at minimum, with each day happening 1 month apart, so that you have a meeting, and then you have a month break where people are actually working on things, and then you do another meeting, and then another meeting. The second thing that's really interesting is talking about cohorts. So she's talked about cohorts that have 18 to 24 women with 6 in each group being a really powerful way to develop. And as you think about that, for me, that made a lot of sense, that if you're having these meetings 1 month apart, and there's a large group of people, you're getting to know a lot of them, but you're also being able to really get to know 6 more specific people. It creates a really strong support system. It creates informal networking, peer coaching, there's encouragement, and it's really great. Another thing that was really interesting, that the research indicates that women get fewer challenging assignments. You want to make sure that if you're looking at a program, there's a challenging assignment to match it with. I thought that was something that's really interesting. And there were just a few other details, one of which was this question of, can men be involved in the conversation? Yeah, you can have men involved in the conversation. And one of the things that they have seen is that when men come into the conversation where it involves leader identity, those calling type conversations, it shifts what women are willing to talk about more openly. And so it's not that it's a bad thing to have men there, it's that sometimes the conversation can go deeper if there are only women in the room. Again, this is not about saying that men are bad to have there. It's just that the conversations might be a little bit different in terms of what is happening. It's good to have male allies there. It's just that there may be some need for some conversations to happen in a slightly different fashion. If you are looking at something and you're thinking about vetting, I would be thinking about, does it have some of these elements in terms of your leader identity, your calling? Are there male allies there? But are there also going to be opportunities for you to have more comfortable conversations with women? Does it happen over an extended period of time? And I think that can be a really valuable set of questions for you as you're starting to think about your leader development. You might not have access to all of these things within your company, but if you can find it, or you can look at an external program and you feel like there is that opportunity there, that's what I would be looking for. Okay, well, that leaves us to kind of the last half of the podcast, which is typically a message on a spiritual message of some sort, a message of encouragement. I don't have a big message for you today because what I want to do is cue you up for what is coming in this season. We have a couple of really wonderful speakers, and I will tell you that as I have edited and listened to these recordings, I have been so encouraged and inspired. If there were any bonus assignment that I would give you, it would be to look around and ask people if they would be willing to just mentor you or talk with you about something. That's something that almost all of us can do. People are so often so willing to support us if we're willing to ask. Again and again, people say to me as I'm coaching them how surprised they are that their colleagues, their peers, their direct reports, their managers, and others are excited for them when they formally declare a goal and ask them and regularly check in with them month to month on that feedback. So with that, that wraps up kind of a short episode for us to queue up season 2. Thank you so much for coming and listening, and it's going to be a great season.